What is ActiveWorkload? What does it do? I'm Ben, and we're going to take a couple minutes and look into that. All right, so our use case is we have two arrays synchronously replicating to one another, forming a pure storage active cluster pair. We have array 1 and we have array 2. And now notice the workload on array 2. It's a relatively heavy workload. And that is because we have a local workload as well as a synchronous replication workload. The local workload is about 200 megabytes a second. And we want to move that to a new array using ActiveWorkload. So we're going to move this volume right here, workload 02, representing that workload, to this new array that has lots of headroom. It's hardly doing anything at the moment. All right, so how do we do this? How do we get this workload over to a new array from this array? Well, it's straightforward. It's a 4-step process. 1, you just connect the arrays. So the new array and the old array see each other. 2, you create a pod and you stretch that pod. This basically takes that workload and synchronously connects it to the new array. 3, you connect the host to the new array. So the host is already cabled up to both arrays. You have to make the host aware of all the paths to both arrays. And then finally, and 4th, you unstretch that pod over to the new array from the old array. This effectively takes that workload and transfers it completely over to the new array. Okay, so step 1, let's connect the arrays. We want to make a new array connection or a second array connection to the other array, or is the array that we're going to move the local workload over to. Okay, we're going to speed this up a little bit because it's boring. But to connect array, you just need a connection key and a management address. So go over here to the remote array. I'm clicking through, get the connection key. We're going to copy that, click OK, paste it. Then we're going to choose synchronous replication, of course, and then finally paste in the management address. And click connect, and now we have our array connection. The next step that we have to do is we have to create a pod, and then we have to stretch that pod. We'll call it move data pod. Now we got to move in the volume that represents that workload, which is volume workload 02. We'll move it into the pod we just created. And now we have to stretch this pod. So we'll choose a remote array, the one that we want to move that workload to. We're adding it. And this is called stretching a pod, or effectively stretching that workload. We're going to take that workload running on the array that is a little bit overburdened, and we're going to stretch it over to this other array with plenty of headroom. Status currently is resyncing. We're at 0%. This is going to ramp up and reach 100 in moments. We can move to our third step, and that is to connect the host on the new array. So yes, fundamental to how ActiveWorkload works, you need to have the host have multiple physical cables or paths to both arrays. So when I say connect the host on the new array, it is connecting to the exact same host that the other array was connected to. All right, and finally, we're at the 4th step. We need to unstretch the pod to effectively deposit that workload on the new array. Now notice that when I went to remove the array from the pod, effectively unstretching that pod, I have an error here that we cannot remove array because at least one of its hosts is connected to the pod's volumes, which is correct. So we have to move over to the remote array from this array perspective, which was the original array. All right, so we're going to disconnect the host here. And now that it's disconnected, I can unstretch this pod and deposit the workload over to the new array. We'll click back on the original array. And you can see that we have mirrored writes, but we no longer have local writes. Here's what it looked like before and after.